Putin is not Trump's equal in any sense. They've got nuclear weapons. They've got some gas which they can't exploit without Western technology. That's it. Their economy is 1/14 of that of the United States. So for reasons that are sort of slightly unclear, Trump appears to have admitted Putin as an equal, and he manifestly isn't. Russia is not in a strong position. It's lost 800,000 killed or wounded, and it's running its economy on a war footing that is not sustainable and will lead to a dramatic credit crunch and inflation next year. It's got a manpower crisis. And for all that it feels that it's winning, because it is, because of the horrific sacrifices it's making glacial military progress. Putin has bet the farm on this negotiation. Actually, Putin needs this to succeed more than Trump does. And I think that gives Trump quite a lot more power than perhaps he realizes.
International institutions have been a key part of the post-Second World War settlement. They include NATO and, of course, the United Nations. But in an era where Washington is thawing its tensions with Moscow, the world appears to be turning on its axis. Let's speak now about the wider geopolitics to Sir Alex Younger, who was the longest-serving chief of MI6 from 2014 to 2020. Good morning to you. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning.
When you hear that discussion from a senior Ukrainian, a former prime minister, still believing really that the United States is on Ukraine's side, do you think that is borne out by the events that we've seen over the past week and the comments that have come from Donald Trump and Vice President Vance and the others?
I think it's all to play for, honestly. The reality is this, that Trump promised to end the war in a day. Ending the war of itself is a laudable objective. In a day was hopelessly unrealistic. And it's not happening. And it's not happening because Putin wants something completely different to the thing that Trump wants to talk about. Putin wants Ukraine to be a non-country. Trump wants to talk about land for peace. It's proving a great deal more complicated, therefore, than Donald Trump would have thought. And this is worrying because we're going to hit a point where he's got to make a choice. And the choice he has is to recognize the dangers, as very clearly set out by your previous guest, of essentially agreeing a deal on Putin's terms, which would vindicate this new world order where might is right, and where the rights of big nations trump the rights of small nations, pun intended. Or hopefully, and I imagine this is an argument that Starmer and Macron will carry to Washington, Trump can be persuaded that he needs to hold out for a better deal, one that actually has at the end of this conversation some form of residual free Ukraine with an independent government and an independent foreign policy.
You talk about strongman politics or big nations trumping smaller nations, but what's your assessment? How strong in reality is Russia, is Putin's Russia, or indeed Trump's America?
Yeah, this is what I would be saying to Donald Trump. I saw that Meloni was running this argument, and she's quite right. Now, Putin is not Trump's equal in any sense. They've got nuclear weapons. They've got some gas which they can't exploit without Western technology. That's it. Their economy is 1/14 of that of the United States. So for reasons that are sort of slightly unclear, Trump appears to have admitted Putin as an equal, and he manifestly isn't. Russia is not in a strong position. It's lost 800,000 killed or wounded, and it's running its economy on a war footing that is not sustainable and will lead to a dramatic credit crunch and inflation next year. It's got a manpower crisis. And for all that it feels that it's winning, because it is, because of the horrific sacrifices it's making glacial military progress. Putin has bet the farm on this negotiation. Actually, Putin needs this to succeed more than Trump does. And I think that gives Trump quite a lot more power than perhaps he realizes.
And do you think that might mean that, therefore, the conflict itself drags on?
I think that one way or another, there will be a ceasefire this year. Is that a frozen conflict based on very little real agreement, which is just a prelude to this war starting up again, when both sides have redrawn their forces? Or is it a stable peace? That's the range of outcome here. But certainly, I think the pressure being put on by Donald Trump and the reality of Russia's position means that something has got to change. And by the way, this is a key point, Adam. I don't actually criticize Trump for disrupting the West's approach to Ukraine because it wasn't working before. Our approach before appeared to be to let them lose slowly. There was nothing particularly honorable about that either. I've got huge criticisms of the way in which this has been conducted. And frankly, I think we need to remember the strength of the Western negotiating position. But I don't decry in any way attempts to end this through diplomacy.
When you look at your career in Britain's security establishment, if I can call it that, how do you feel about, the failure to maintain defence spending?
I think that we thought that what we had was real. We saw geopolitics as something that essentially we had consigned to the dustbin with the end of history. And we mistook essentially a bubble created by US security for a permanently changed world where autocrats would become more like us as they got richer and the world safer as a result. It's called globalization. I think subliminally we bought into that idea. Now, the thing about being a spy is that it never looked like that on my side of the fence. It was very clear that the dictators didn't get a memo about the end of history. It was very clear, on the contrary, that our ideologies were diverging even as we became more interconnected, and that was producing a much more dangerous world. I think understandably, in the UK, we got used to that old way, felt we could spend the money on better things. Obviously, you want to spend the money on health and education, not defense. But that was based on a false premise. And I worry because I think we disarmed militarily, we disarmed materially, we effectively abandoned our defense industry. But most importantly, we disarmed culturally. We lost a societal approach to defending ourselves and felt that it was enough just to have a professional army that we knew little about that kind of did stuff. And that's the big adjustment we've got to make.
But you in the intelligence services were actually saying to successive governments, we're not talking about a Labour Conservative thing here, there is a big problem here which you're not seeing.
No, I don't think it's our place to do that. We were supplying intelligence that made it increasingly clear that, as I say, the autocrats had not got the memo and posed a threat to us. This was, if you remember, while we were still under the shadow of a really significant Islamist threat. So that was, I think, also a big issue. We had two different types of very serious threats coming towards us. And then there's the cyber stuff. So it would have been clear, but there absolutely wasn't a moment where we went, you're out of line, your resources are out of line. That's not our job.
And how do you see the international order evolving from here? Some people, even President Macron said that NATO was brain dead some years ago. Clearly, Donald Trump doesn't like it. Is NATO still viable?
I think we're moving from, the mega trend here is moving from a time of institutions and rules to a time of strong men and deals. The question is whether our alliances can survive that. The irony is that the thing that our autocratic opponents truly fear more than anything is those same alliances. So we should not give up on them. But they are, I suppose, at the end of the day, transactions. And Trump has a point when he says that we haven't fulfilled our side of the bargain. So they will fall apart. They will, unless we demonstrate readiness to pull our weight. I think we were inhibited in the past as Europe from building up an alternative pole of security because we thought that would somehow alienate the Americans. The opposite is true. If we don't get our act together and build up our own capabilities, how can we expect the Americans to honor their side of the deal? And how can we expect to garner the respect that would underpin that?
So that is what, primarily defence spending, is it? Or does it go further than that?
No, it is about us recognizing that in a world of deals, there is an entry price, and that's called hard power. To your earlier question, Adam, it's about the fact that we have forgotten how to do hard power. Hard power, to my mind, has two essential ingredients. One is military strength, and the other is being on the cutting edge of technological innovation, which we need to do anyway. We can't do without that hard power anymore. Actually, when you look at Europe and the European Union, since Putin's invasion, it has developed a sense of its hard power, but we are so far behind, and we need to move. But look, we are 10 times richer as European NATO than Russia. We can relatively easily flex to the demands this places on us. Not without some sacrifice, I readily acknowledge, but it is not impossible. And the expense of dealing with this later is far, far more forbidding.
And what you're saying is the UK acting in concert, in partnership with Europe. There isn't an alternative to that in our own interests.
Well, there might be a sort of fortress Britain, I suppose, but it doesn't seem to me like a particularly rational way to proceed. I think that this is an opportunity post-Brexit for us to get into a properly new adult conversation with Europe, and for Europe to recognise that it shouldn't be invested in Britain's failure. On the contrary, it needs to be invested in our strength. And for us to realise that we need to present as a positive and useful organisation, country in the security space. They need us now. I'm not saying this is a transaction that we need to weaponise. I'm saying it is a fact. And I really like the fact that this new reality is transcending the old squabbles and allowing us to play a responsible and sensible part with a more open-minded Europe. And that works. I also think there's particular things about the UK that are attractive to America, particularly our readiness to deviate from the mad technology regulation that Europe is imposing on itself to their huge detriment. So if Britain plays this right, I think we can be a very useful conduit between the two. And I'm confident that's what the Prime Minister is aiming for.
On that note of optimism, Sir Alex Younger, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.